In this video, I am going to show you how to manipulate the pivot of an object in Maya. Alright? The pivot of any object usually lies within its geometric center. It forms the point around which an object rotates. Now, in Maya, the pivot of an object can be manipulated by activating the pivot editing mode. While the pivot editing mode can be activated in many ways. First, let us create a cube and then scale it up. Now, select the Move tool to activate it and then double-click on it to open the tool settings. Here, you will notice that there is an option with the name Edit Pivot and there are 4 checkboxes below that option, out of which the first 2 are the important options that we will be needing during the manipulation of pivot. So, if you select an object, you will normally find the manipulator for the Move tool, using which you can move the object as usual. But within the tool settings, if you click on this Edit Pivot option, you will have the manipulator for editing the pivot of the object. Using this, you will be able to move the pivot of an object to any position wherever you want, even outside of the object. Alright? In case you want to go back and set the pivot of the object to where it was initially, then you just have to click on this Reset option to reset the pivot. This will set the pivot back to where it was by default. Alright? Now, when I activate the pivot editing mode by clicking on this Edit Pivot option, if I hover around the edge, corner, or surface of the object, you will notice an Align option around the cursor. What this does is, if we click on the edge, or surface, or corner, it allows us to align the pivot to the position and orientation of the selected edge, corner, or the surface. Alright? Now generally, we don't require to change the orientation of pivot, but we do require changing the position of the pivot a lot. Hence, we can uncheck this checkbox for orientation if we don't need to change it. Alright? In this way, we can change the pivot of an object to the position we want. This Align feature simply helps us to align the pivot to the position of the selected component, such as an edge, corner, or surface. For that, we have to first select the direction where we want the pivot to move by selecting one of these 3 handles, and then select any of the corner points, edge, or a surface to which we want the pivot to align with. Once we are done, we can exit the pivot editing mode by clicking back on this Edit Pivot option. Now, as I said, there are many ways in which you can activate the pivot editing mode in Maya. The first option was by going into the tool settings as you saw. The other way to do it is by pressing and holding down the D key on your keyboard. This will temporarily activate the pivot editing mode for objects. As soon as you are done with manipulating the pivot, you can exit the editing mode by leaving the D key. You don't have to hold it down anymore. Another way is to press the Insert button on your keyboard. You don't have to hold it down, just press it once to activate the pivot editing mode. And once you are done manipulating the pivot, you can exit the mode by pressing the Insert button again. Alright? There is yet another option which is used to set the pivot of an object to its geometric center, and that is this Center Pivot option under the Modify menu. If you select an object and go to Modify menu and click on Center Pivot option, the pivot of the object will be shifted to its geometric center. One more thing that I would like to show you is that we can change the orientation of the axis of an object from world to object by clicking on this drop down and selecting from world to object. Let me show you an example how this works. Here is a cube. If I activate the Move tool, we'll find here 3 handles pointing towards X, Y and Z direction. If I relate those directions with the cube, you will notice that all the handles are coming out from the sides of this cube. These are actually tied up with the global direction. Now, if I simply rotate the cube using the rotate tool to somewhat around 45 degrees and then activate the move tool again, you will notice that the handles are still pointing towards the same global directions, despite the fact that the cube has been rotated and the handles are now coming out from the corners instead of sides as was before. In such a case, we can change the orientation of the axis from world to object. This will change the direction of these handles to align with the object and not the world. You can now move the cube along its own x-axis and not along the global x-axis. Alright? Once you are done, you can change it back to global by selecting here the world option again. Alright? So this is how we can manipulate the pivot of an object and also change the orientation of the axis of an object in Maya. Alright? See you in the next video.